This is not a recruitment podcast.
Thanks very much for joining us, Virginia, for another episode of Powered by People. So today we've got Bill Brewer. Bill, what's your title these days? It seems to change.
Talent Strategy Director.
Talent Strategy Director. Myself, Rex Rustling, co-founder, Director of New Partnerships, which is basically Sales Director. And Virginia Tirado, Director of Talent Acquisition for Zalando. Maybe you just want to give us a little bit more background about yourself, Virginia.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a really cool space and just wonderful to connect with you. My background is quite interesting as well. I mean, I'm originally from Venezuela, so I may have lost my accent along the way because I picked up the American accent where I lived for many years. And now I've been in the UK for the last 15. Time just flies. And so I've got an interesting career. I started as a lawyer and moved on to get into the business and do business operations for a number of years with Oracle. And then Amazon gave me my first shot at moving into recruitment and having an HR career 8 years ago. And since then, I haven't looked back, and I've had some really cool roles. Worked for Amazon in exec recruitment, then the industry recruitment for AWS, doing tech non-SDE roles, so non-software engineers, but professional services, solution architecture, and so on. And then Zalando came around, and I've been there for the last 3 years, building, shaping, experimenting, innovating, and doing some really cool things.
Yeah, I noticed you joined there in like March 2020.
Yeah.
Which must have been interesting.
Yeah, I joined March 2nd of 2020, so 2 weeks before we publicly went into pandemic mode. And since then, it has been quite an interesting ride. But I think, in change, the last 3 years have taught us so many things. And I was sharing, that change.
Yeah,
the one constant we have now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I didn't realize that you'd actually started off as a lawyer and then moved into talent acquisition. I think it's really interesting because that probably helped you a lot in terms of negotiation.
Absolutely. And I think, we'll probably get into this later in the podcast, but we're talking about in how important it is to realize that as humans, we are very flexible, we are agile. And at the end of the day, we hear a lot about skill-based recruitment, but it really is about transferable skills. And like you said, you made the association about, negotiation. It's also about understanding and influencing. And there's just so many other transferable skills, right, that allow you to adapt. And as we see new careers, it'll be interesting to see how our skills help us adapt to these new careers.
And that's a lovely segue. So we always try and pick a new subject, and we think about what people really want to hear about in talent acquisition. And we've done some really interesting ones over the past few months on everything that is really like a current topic at the moment. And something that I had some ideas around what we could talk about today. And then I was speaking to Virginia in the run-up to this podcast, and you brought something up which I thought was actually not something we previously considered, but is probably, in my opinion, a burning issue tomorrow that we probably need to start thinking about today. So I'm quite excited, and already this podcast is kicking off a bit late because we literally spent the past half an hour talking about it. So upskilling our talent so we don't lose our competitive edge in the current climate. So I think firstly, I'd just love to know what that means for you.
So we promise we're not going to get into AI, right? So that we don't segue right a little bit, yeah. But what does it mean for us? I think that we have seen a huge change. We talked about COVID, but we also know that in another kind of trendy term, the green transition, we've talked about AI, we've talked about the economy and how that has had an impact, right, on jobs. And I think that it's very easy to look at, the short-term view of and I know money is king, right? So companies do have some constraints. You have to make decisions based on shareholders or investors or so on. But it's very easy for us to make short-term decisions. And we see it a lot in what's happening with the layoffs, right? That even in places that we never thought we having layoffs, and even in sectors like, did you really ever think that, a software engineer was going to lose a job? So I think that it is about looking at, the lost cost opportunity there, right? What it takes when you lose people, right? And what it takes when you onboard people.
Yeah.
And when you think about laying off talent that is engaged, loves your brand, fits into your culture, pioneers in your culture, but they may not have the right skills you need at a certain time, not knowing what that gap can be and not doing something about it, I think is going to be the greatest disadvantage we're going to have, right? So you see 1 year, recruiters 2 years ago in the summer of 2021 were the most...
as in demand as software developers, it was crazy.
It was crazy. And how many of us know people in our networks that are now amazing talent that are looking for other things to do? And as an employer, if you actually have the opportunity to think about how you place them and where they can go for you while things change, instead of letting them go, imagine, how much are you saving, but how competitive it is for you, as an advantage in this economy. So that's kind of the context behind this discussion. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too far down one path because it's going to probably come up later, but maybe we need to think about when we look for skill requirements, we think about current skills and interest in particular future skills. We see it, I'll say from a tech perspective, because that's my background. Let's say a current code base is in PHP, but you're going to be transitioning towards something like Golang. You ideally want to hire engineers that have got one and an interest in the other because you're kind of future-proofing the organization, or at least that's what you want to be doing in the good times.
I think you're absolutely right. I think with, investors and money in business will always take the forefront, and hard decisions have to be made. But if companies have a way to be able to retain as much talent as they possibly can, it should never be underestimated, just the value of people that are already embedded in the business, know the business inside out, the teams, the politics, all of these kind of things. When people are putting business plans together, I've seen it recently, they never really take into account just how long it takes to really onboard someone, and how when you can actually see them getting up to speed and delivering in those roles. And if companies think that they can, turn off a tap now, make a lot of redundancies, turn back on a tap in a year and expect the same level of productivity, it's not going to work like that. So to really, if you can put people into different roles and use their skills in other areas, that would be a huge game for a lot of businesses.
So it's still developers of yesterday, Java developers today, the machine learning engineers of tomorrow, or whatever it'll be. So I guess that leads me nicely on. So I guess we've already talked about it a little bit, but love to know a little bit more about what everyone has actually seen as the recent impact of the economic climate on investing in basically the skills in our talent. So I guess start with Virginia. What have you seen recently?
So I think sadly, it is a cycle that repeats itself, right? When I moved here in 2008, maybe aging myself a bit here, but it's okay. I moved to help the Oracle business back then grow the professional services business, from 1 billion to 2 billion in a very short period of time. I wanted to do that in 4 years. And then the 2008, 2009 financial crisis hit. And similar to COVID, right? This is something unexpected. And back then we did some cool stuff to protect talent because we had to make some tough decisions. I think today it seems like sometimes we forget and we haven't learned from some of the things that we've seen in the past. And I read an interesting article in Time in April, in Time magazine, about how much evidence there is that, layoffs eventually do not give you the financial return, especially within a 3-year window, And this whole article was about, was tech getting these layoffs wrong? And I think that that's what I've seen the most. There's very few companies today that are thinking about this strategically. If you go back to Amazon's history, Jeff Bezos has been very famous for his annual letter to shareholders, because he didn't want the company to be held ransom to his long-term strategy, because he had to deliver value to shareholders. And obviously, they've had to do some changes lately, like everyone else. But obviously, in the size of the company, the changes that they're doing are very small.
Yeah.
But I think that that's what we need to start asking, right? It's like, can we continue with this, wheel of waste, right? In hiring and firing, depending on how the climate changes.
Yeah.
And
wheel of waste. I think you've just coined it.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the economy. I mean, if you see, what's happening with interest rates right now, everybody's a bit nervous, and people aren't sure if rates are going to go down by 2024 or by 2025, or how many people are trying to secure their mortgages. What is this going to mean for people being able to make payments? So the economy is not going to change drastically. So this is even more important now. Like, how far can we go about just cutting and cutting and cutting without thinking about investing? And I think that the topic that I'm very passionate about today, and I think it's probably going to become an area where I'm going to spend a lot of my time, is really working on sustainable talent. Yeah.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, because I look at talent in skills in business very much within talent acquisition, because that's obviously where I work. What I've noticed over the past, I would say, 9 months, in the current climate, is we've had a really, really busy period of time where everybody is just like staring at their feet, trying to hit aggressive hiring goals that we saw in 2021, unsustainable hiring. And what that kind of meant is that everybody was extremely time poor. And now, over the past 9 months, where I've seen, unfortunately, people are not hiring as much, and as a result, people in talent acquisition have got more time. I've seen a lot more knowledge sharing going on in the community. So I've personally feel like it's been interesting in the past 9 months to see all these talent acquisition communities popping up, people getting to know each other better because they've got more time to do it, people thinking about what can they do in terms of extracurricular for knowledge sharing exercises, workshops, presentations.
Mentors has been a big,
it
popped up a lot, hasn't it?
Definitely.
Find mentors and other people in the industry to learn from.
Definitely. And that's been a positive story in all of this recently. I do think that it's been very much led by individuals wanting it, rather than necessarily from organizations recognizing that there's a bit of time where they can actually say, do you know what, we're not hiring as much. We know that it's not going to last forever. Talent acquisition is going to be important for us in the future. So all the special projects that we wish we could do that we never usually have time for, let's do that now. Let's get on the front foot in terms of our frameworks around workforce planning, or our DE&I strategies, or leveling within the business. All these different types of projects, because let's not forget that recruitment is only one channel within talent acquisition. And for me, I've seen that being quite positive from an individual perspective. Haven't seen too many examples of businesses recognizing that opportunity and sort of future-proofing the talent acquisition of an organization from that perspective, possibly driven by the sort of need for operational efficiency for the bottom line.
I think the companies that are hiring I'm seeing an interview process a lot more around soft skills coming into it and their ability to adapt when they come into a business now. Whereas in the past, it's been, can they do that job? Let's get them in. We're hiring very fast. Whereas now there's being a bit more emphasis on their team fit, their ability to take on new tasks. Are they people that have trained and developed themselves in the past? Because they're trying to future-proof themselves a bit more to not having to do layoffs and people that can get involved in different areas.
Find jobs for themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
like, oh, we're not hiring. Not look busy, but be busy because I need to show that I'm adding some value during these times.
Yes, exactly.
Which is actually, I've definitely heard of a few. Well, I know a few people who have told me they're doing exactly that.
Yeah.
Cool. So, what happens if we don't deal with this? What if we don't address this? What's the outcome? I mean, from my perspective, we were speaking off mic a moment ago about having these sort of inverted triangles of organizations where effectively we're not investing in skills, we're not investing in our talent, and you end up with an organization full of senior people, big salaries, all want to be leaders, all want to have an area of remit, but not that many people coming through. And when you start your career, you're a technician before you're an engineer, and there'll be a lack of executors and too many seniors in an organization, and I think that's really dangerous.
I'll tell you a little bit about what I have seen in looking at the data since maybe 2019, and particularly how this affects, for example, D&I, in tech, right? And why it's so important to have a talent strategy that fits your your workforce plan, because that younger, more junior talent is the talent that knows about AI, knows about how to prompt on ChatGPT, are the most agile, but also is the most diverse talent. So if you look across Europe, 40% of women or software engineers with less than 5 years of experience are women, right? So if you think about how diverse that is at that level, if you stop feeding that new talent and you stop training, what's going to happen is the senior people, if the business has slowed down, may actually be thinking of moving elsewhere, and you're going to have a big gap. So I know, again, we talk about sometimes when the financial outlook is not great, you have to make some tough decisions, and sometimes, unfortunately, some of these programs like your early careers or your D&I programs and so on may suffer. You would have to put them on hold. But is that the right thing to do? And I think at least you should have the conversation with your stakeholders about what that means. Right? So everything that you've invested to bring up that D&I, that diversity in your tech teams, if you put it on hold, or if you're not going into the right talent pool, what impact is that going to have on the long run?
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because I think it goes further than that, especially for the big organizations. If you think about the sort of decacorns of the tech world who have got really large presences in big cities, if they're not investing in bringing up talent or upskilling people in those communities, they also therefore will bring trouble to the cities that they're in. Like let's think of an example like Berlin, where there's a lot of really successful tech companies. If they don't foster relationships with academic organizations and have academies and things like that, what they will therefore not be able to do forever is hire really skilled people in those cities, because eventually there'll be a brain drain, and then that means that they need to attract more talent to these cities. So that means what they do is they bring in lots of well-paid talent, and then that causes societal problems in terms of cost of rent, space, like literally living costs for people who don't work in said industries, and then that causes an issue, and that can't go on forever. So then what happens is you have to start looking further afield for, but like, okay, well, where's the next Berlin? Where, perhaps we can get all of our talent at somewhere that has like fantastic educational institutions at a lower cost base. Okay, great. Why don't we pivot there over the next 5 to 10 years? And it can become, unfortunately, a bit cyclical and not sustainable, like you were saying before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know we don't want to get off topic on the D&I and early career programs are obviously the whole podcast in themselves. But yeah, it was a question we asked on an earlier podcast: does D&I and early careers programs Are they a luxury in business, or do they go out the window the second the economy gets tough? And I think that's a really interesting topic, and you can really see the DNA of businesses as to why they invested in those topics in the first place. And ultimately, the ones who invested in it for a tick box exercise that are good for PR will be the ones that obviously chop some of these things. And actually, the ones who invested in it because they realize and truly understand the productivity and the way that the business can thrive by having a great early careers program and a great D&I program, can really see the strong results and won't make the cuts as much in those areas where they can avoid, because they know that actually investing in learning and development, early careers, D&I is going to be a key to actually getting out of the mess that they may be in financially over the next years.
Yeah, there'll be the organizations that are basically bringing through skilled people who know the business, know the product, where perhaps other businesses who haven't done that might be out there spending 120 grand on an engineer.
And I think that to add to that point, you look at, you pointed up to the example of Berlin, but if you think about where is your talent pool coming from, and what is the age of that talent pool, whether it is, your aging population, 50 plus, right, or your Gen Z, right, and what does this talent want? Right. So if you forget or disengage because you think, oh, I can't afford it, that's great. 3 years down the line, when you want to tap into that and you haven't invested, nobody is going to know your brand. Nobody's going to want to engage with you. And most, even worst of all is that this, war for talent that we talk about, is it really going to be a war, or, who's winning it? Is it going to keep you competing with your other employers, or you competing to actually, get the attention from this talent that is very clear on what they want for their future, what brands they want to work for, and so on. So I think you cannot look at this problem on talent sustainability or workforce planning or talent strategy or the careers of the future or, future of jobs without having a holistic view of what the different segments that are impacted or have a say in it will need to be successful in the future.
Yeah, definitely. My mind goes a bit blank when I see what some of the recruiters at our organization do. Like they're out there recruiting on TikTok and using all these funky sourcing techniques I've no idea about, because they're the next generation of recruiters.
Well, and that is really interesting, because actually that generation said, email. How many of them use email? I mean, even myself, I've got an event coming up in August, and I wanted to send out an invite, and the app that I was using will only give me two options: a phone number, if it was an American phone number, or an email. And half the people, we don't even use email anymore. So if you think about most of our CVs, you will have an email, you have a LinkedIn, but the majority of your conversation happens on email. Right, that's how our systems are set up for recruitment. Guess what? This generation Z, you better know what their Snapchat handle is. You better know, what their Instagram is, and you better be talking to them on TikTok.
You can't have a presentation without a QR code at the beginning these days.
No.
Yeah. Where is that you're doing the presentation, by the way?
Oh, on RecFast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. In the next week, I hope that everybody will be there. It's the event for recruitment, right? So
yeah, exactly.
You'll be there too, and we'll have some fun. Hopefully the weather will be better than today.
Well, I hope so, but at the same time, I think it would be good if it's a proper festival and it chucks it down with rain.
Yeah, we see tents blowing away. Yeah, everyone's in wellies.
Yeah, to get the full summer festival experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Everyone's cars get stuck in the mud. Yeah. Great. So I guess what I'd be quite interested in knowing more about is where you see the biggest threats to our competitive edge when it comes to skills. Is it economic conditions? Is it, for example, changing trends? Is it artificial intelligence? I've said it. What do you think it's going to be?
So, if you haven't yet looked up Future of Jobs report from the World Economic Forum and you are in recruitment, I will say that it is important that you have a look. It's a very long report, but If you don't have the time, just go to the infographic section.
Oh, no, I know.
Of pictures, right? Exactly. Yeah, it just came out at the end of May, so it's pretty fresh.
Okay.
But I think 3 things we're gonna see driving this change, right? So we know about artificial intelligence, automation, robotics. That's one thing. Technology, basically, and then the famous green transition. Because even though there might be some deniers out there, climate change is real and it's here to stay, right? And we're talking about that constantly. Texas, Houston has 50 degrees temperature. I mean, insane, right? And how does that affect the workforce? And then the economy. Again, we talked about the fact that there are, it's not just COVID, right? We came from 3 years of COVID, and then you've got the war in Ukraine that hasn't really given us any indication it's going to stop anytime soon. We hope that it will. Yeah. And then everything else that's happening around inflation, interest rates and so on. So I think you have to think about different factors affecting, right, the creation of new jobs, the elimination of some jobs. And if you think about it, you will hope that things will even out, that we lose X number of jobs and we create the same amount of new jobs, right?
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. And actually, the reason I pointed out to the World Economic Forum is that they say that in this transition over the next 5 years, 23% of jobs that we have today will change. That's almost 25. It's like 1 in 4 jobs, right? So if we think about the 4 of us sitting here, one of us might have a different job,
Rosie's here, just in case anybody wondering. We're just behind the camera.
Yes. So we're So it's not a ghost or
yeah. Rosie, the ghost producer.
Yeah. So, but really, I mean, that's to bring it to life, right? To bring it to perspective. And some of the stuff we're seeing there, our leaders need to be reading and they need to be aware. And they need to prepare for the future, right?
Yeah, 100%. Our jobs have changed so much, and I don't even know when it happened. Like literally 2013, I was a regular recruiter in an agency, and now I spend, all my time on HubSpot. Like it's just completely different. Yeah, it's mad.
You get to do some cool podcasts.
Yeah, that's true. Although I love. It is about like when it comes to keeping up. Little segue to a story of like how it can affect you. Like my dad, big up Guy Rustin, commercial surveyor in Sheffield. He's been in his field for like 40 odd years, most of it by himself. So he's not necessarily keeping up with new trends and things like that. And it goes to show how important it is to keep up with developments in your own industry, because your job's not going to be this. Your job, never mind not being the same, it might not be there in 5 to 10 years. I never forget, he overheard me on a call talking about, I was recruiting an analyst, and he overheard me talking about dashboards. He came up and he was like, well, I know loads of joiners. Why don't you ask me? Yeah.
We are talking about a man that didn't want to close his laptop down while he was on holiday.
Oh, yeah.
He had out of office on.
He said, my out of office is on, so don't turn my computer off.
Bless him.
But I think this is it, right? I mean, you talk about resilience, and in the past, you could have those 40 years, a wonderful career. But we were talking earlier about us. And in the last 10 years, how many different roles, and actually not just different employers, because it's not about employers, but how many different roles have you taken on?
Yeah.
Because at the end, we are human, adaptable and agile, and we have to embrace change. Yeah. And I think it's not only upon the employers to figure out on upskilling folks and what they do with talent, it's also with individuals. And if you think about the Generation Z, I mean, they're very adept, and they're also very smart when it comes to new technologies. They can go from TikTok to Instagram to, don't really go into LinkedIn. I'm trying to get my kids to get into LinkedIn as they start looking at new jobs in the future, and they're like, what? Why? This is so boring. Yeah. But at the end, it is about that.
Go embrace change.
And we need to take that wonderful experience community of talent that have 30 plus years and remind them that they have a lot to teach, but they can still learn and they can do new things, right? And that's also, and you've got so many skills. One thing that I really enjoy about the working in companies where you have different generations working together is how much we can learn from each other. And I got a really cool WhatsApp yesterday from one of my ex-recruiting managers who sent me just a little meme about, true leaders, right, are those that surround themselves with people that challenge them versus people that just say yes. And it made my day, because he was referring to, missing working with me. And I said to him, my response was like, I love to surround myself with people that challenge me, because I think that we can learn from each other, right? And that is the journey that we need to keep going. Get surrounded by people that can teach you stuff. You will still be teaching as well, right? Because it's always two-way. But never think you're too old to learn or do something different.
Yeah, I think you touched on something incredibly pertinent there, that it's not just on companies' responsibility to coach and develop their talent. It's a skill that is needed, I think, for the future, to be able to coach and self-develop yourself through your career. I think one thing that recruiters are great at is that there's so many events, meetups, talks, podcasts on ways to learn and develop as an individual. I'm often having conversations with people where it's, where I'm saying that, it's not necessarily a training session you need to go on. You need to go out there and network and speak to other people and learn new trends that are coming up, because that's where you're going to learn and develop as an individual. But so many people, there is a big gap, especially in some generations where they don't do as much of that. But I think the younger generation are very good at that, and that skill, developing their own skills.
Our old boss, Bill, readers are leaders. That always stuck with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you, going back to that report I was mentioning, when you look at the skills that are trending today and what are the skills that we need in the next 5 years, technology literacy has kind of dropped to number 6, because that's still very important. But I think we will need to have really good analytical skills, problem-solving skills, because we see change happening so quick. And a lot of it is going to be also, influencing. And so soft skills that are things that we sometimes take for granted. Like you were saying, this is a trend you're seeing.
Yeah.
Employers wanting to see more of those soft skills that help people adapt to a changing environment are key, right? And so learning and continuing to learn is not just a responsibility of the L&D department. It's all of our responsibilities to really ensure that we're prepared for the future.
Yeah, I think creativity is going to be a really important soft skill in the future, because as we get better at automation, I think that's going to be one of the last things that we can automate, is the ability to come up with like innovative solutions and look at problems differently. And I think that, Bill, you might be onto something. I think soft skills are going to play a bigger and bigger part in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the scary part is that some of those soft skills, we need to make sure we continue to teach, because, when we are in a remote environment and you're new in your career, like, how do you do, that innovation comes together also by a lot of idea exchange, but also the communication and influencing, not just as an influencer on Instagram, but actually influencing others with ideas that you can actually bring for transformation and innovation. So it's important that we're aware of it and that we ensure that we do our part to.
What do you think about like classroom-based learning then? Because I know that if you go back, classroom-based learning was easier when we were all 100% in the office. I don't know many organizations nowadays that require people to be 100% in the office. And as a result, if it's hybrid or people working remotely, like doing that, having that learning and development can be, I guess, I'm not going to say more difficult, but certainly different. And I think maybe it was a bit simpler when you could just put people all in a classroom together and say, this is what we're learning today. Whereas when it's quite like self-taught, it's a bit of a challenge.
I think it hasn't changed. There's always been I think there's 4 different types of learning, right? I mean, they talk about auditory and visually and things like that. I think that one of the big things over the last maybe 5-10 years is that there's a lot more opportunity to visually learn. There's a lot more short video learning tools out there now that has changed the way that people learn and develop, but that doesn't mean that it's going to completely wipe out classroom learning, and because there's still a huge population that learns best by listening to someone describe a topic. So I think what will be is the ability to coach and develop people in different ways that will play a big part.
Do we risk sort of everybody having a skill set that's like a mile wide and an inch deep if we sort of like have all this kind of like short content that we can access? And
it's a good point, but I think you have to think a little bit about assessing the skills and understanding what is missing, right? So we don't all have to know how to negotiate a contract, but we all have to learn how to influence, sometimes, even if it is to negotiate your own next pay increase or so on. So you might want, I mean, if you're a salesperson, then influencing and negotiating is such an important skill that you really have to make sure you have the depth. What we see today is that there is a much more pressing need for us to have a bit of that mile-long, knowledge that's probably, an inch deep on many other topics. So it would be great for, like you were talking about your dad, for he to understand how data is used and why data has become so important over the last few years. And then he probably has a huge amount of knowledge around data. He just doesn't know how he's using it or how you're using it, right? So I think that having those exchanges are important. Being able to be back in person to conferences, like having RecFest, again, plugging in for RecFest, in a week's time. And when was the last time you were in an event that there were so many people out there? I went to a conference 2 weeks ago, and we were 247, I think, people in Stockholm that came from all over, from the US, from Asia, from Dubai, and it was amazing.
What was the conference, sorry?
So the conference is led, it's a really interesting conference. It's called the Future Talent Council, and it's one of those organizations that actually bring people from different areas. So you have academia, policymakers, and companies coming together and talking about the talent, the future of talent, and what can we do to make sure we get the right skills, and that schools are preparing people for what the companies need, and so on, right? So it's a really great forum. But the point was that, we learn from even just having a glass of wine at the end and exchanging an idea, if you're over dinner, that you can't really do that on a Zoom call or on a webinar. So make sure you find opportunities for yourself to connect with others, right? And I know it's comfortable to learn at your own pace and do your seminar, but online, but it is important, again, that you as a person take responsibility for creating those opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So,
and pushing yourself out your comfort zone to go to those things, right? Because they're not natural to a lot of people. And I think, especially, we talk about Gen Z quite a lot. A lot of stuff is done online. A lot of their content is consumed online. A lot of their interactions with humans is done online. So there's a huge part of missing doing stuff in person, which we have to teach them and make sure that it's happening, because there's so much to be had from social interactions. You can't sit there on 247 people you said were in this conferences.com. If that was a Zoom call, you wouldn't build any relationships with anyone. Just a person speaking, and the questions will pop up on a little box at the side. No human interaction. But you walk away from that in person doing it, you're not going to know 247 people, of course, but you've certainly got relationships with a bunch of people that you've learned from, you can develop on in the future because of that, which is huge.
You always used to learn more going for like a beer with your sort of bosses on a Thursday after work than you would sort of Monday till Friday in the office a lot of the time. Yeah. Because you just talk shop, don't you? And you get into what you're actually working on a day-to-day, and they give you war stories and advice, and you take something from it. And I guess like now, because that's not necessarily happening as much, it's really important that in the professional setting where people aren't always with each other, that you make time for clinics, like, hours here and there in people's diary, where you get, people together to literally just discuss a subject that someone's working on and someone else is an expert in, which scarcely, actually, I don't know if it comes up very often that organizations have these like enforced sort of clinics where people have got to sort of be there and upskill in an area.
Well, I think that's what hybrid working is, isn't it? I think that's what they try and...
That's what they try and do.
Yeah, I guess so, right? So then you have to be in the office in these days, and so that we can collaborate and work together.
Yeah. So I guess like what we do at the end of these podcasts is we always ask somebody to write down a question for the next guest. And the next guest, the last guest that we had was Catherine Lightfoot. And she's written a question, and you'll have to sort of forgive me because I've got to read Harry Bigwood's handwriting here. What one piece of advice would you give to someone wanting to start out in people/HR/talent?
That's a really great question. I think that you are seeing more people that want to start versus just fall in it by accident. And I think that, first of all, make sure that you like people. Because if you're an introvert, that's fine. But you're going to be able, you need to make sure that you're not going to be annoyed by having to talk to people, right? And that sounds, counterintuitive, but join for the right reason. Like, I would first ask is like, why do you want to get into HR? What's exciting to you about HR? Or what area of HR do you like? Is it because recruiters can make good money? Because if that's the reason, unless you can offer a really good candidate experience, it's not the right thing.
Yeah.
So I would say my first advice would be, understand why you want to go in, what areas you want to explore many areas, because I think that there's such a great overlap between, being a head of TA and perhaps being a head of talent or being a head of people. And you've got skills that you can transfer, so you can actually grow a really nice career, have a really nice path to develop your career. Don't take no for an answer, because if you don't have experience, what you do find is that a lot of people won't always give you a chance because you don't tick a box, right? So go out there, figure out in the network, who can coach you, who can spend some time with you and explaining. And as you go interview for some of these roles, even if you haven't had the experience before, once you know why you want to join, then you can be passionate about the reasons. And that, I think, is really important, because then people will buy into your story and give you a chance. So, yeah, if anybody wants to get into HR and wants to ping me, just get me on LinkedIn and we'll have the conversation.
If I may, I think one thing I would say, if anybody's looking to get into HR or talent acquisition or a related field, people, I think that when you're in an early career phase, the best incentive people have is for helping you is literally just to help. I often find that people are more likely to engage when you're asking for something than you are just giving something. I think literally people don't want that trade-off. They just want a mentor. They want to do something good. So I think that, like you're saying, don't take no for an answer. Don't be afraid to ask.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. And if you ask and you get no, then that's fine. Just keep working. And there's always people. One thing that I do find in this community is that we do like to help each other. Yeah. And we're always sharing advice. We're always looking at, who needs what and how can we help, right? And I think that it is a very generous community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, the only other thing I would add to all of that, and I completely agree with all the points, is I think this goes for any career, is pick people you're going to work with over company you're going to work in. I think, especially people starting out in HR or any job, if you can pick the types of people early on that you're going to be working with, that you're going to learn and develop the most from, rather than, a big shiny brand. I think we've seen what a lot of big shiny brands are capable of doing in the last year. Really making sure you pick, when you're in the interview process, picking, is this a person I can see myself learning from? How long have they been here? What was their learning path? How passionate are they about helping me? Rather than, how good the beanbags are and, these kind of things. It's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Although that is important.
Yeah.
It is important.
Yes, it really is.
Great. Well, I think that's us done. So thanks very much, Virginia. Thanks very much, Bill. Thanks very much, Guy Rustling, for being the butt of all these jokes. And thank you very much from me.
Goodbye. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Of seeing the story from the beginning. And we all know that with an SDR, when you get phoned up as a prospective client, you're not going to listen to a half an hour pitch. Brilliant, I'll buy it straight away. Fantastic. Never happened. So it's a longer term relationship.